If someone were to ask me what the worst experience of my life was, I would always tell them about that trip my friends and I planned with the intention of having fun and enjoying ourselves, but which ended in a tragedy that would mark the lives of those who were there. Just remembering any of those moments gives me chills, and at night, I still have nightmares that I wish would end. But deep down, I know I'll have them for the rest of my life. We were in my best friend's car. I'm going to hide the identities because I don't want this to reach their families and for them to be recognized. Besides, the incident never even made the news. It went unnoticed, as if no one cared about what happened. I can't understand why that was, but in the end, God takes care of justice for all who promote evil. We were excited about the idea of being alone in the woods, so we took a road where, according to one of my friends, we wouldn't encounter any police or anything. These precautions were necessary because one of our friends was sitting on her boyfriend's lap due to the lack of space, which is against the law, and we could have been fined. But we took the risk anyway. We were bold, and once we arrived, we showed it more than ever. We parked the car behind a tree and from there walked a few meters into the woods, eventually reaching a lake where we decided to stay. We were drinking, chatting, and laughing about college stories. It was shaping up to be the best trip of our lives, until the tragedy struck. One of our friends was swimming alone in the lake, while the rest of us were either preparing lunch or lying down talking. We really got distracted by all the joking and fun, until I noticed that our friend was no longer in the water. He wasn't anywhere in sight. I alerted the others and we immediately ran to the shore shouting his name, desperate to know what had happened to him. We couldn't find him anywhere. One of the girls suggested we not panic, saying he might have gone off to relieve himself somewhere, but I didn't believe that. Then, minutes later, our friend's body surfaced in the middle of the lake, face down, obviously lifeless. No one dared to go in and grab him. He was a good swimmer, so something must have happened while he was in the water. Maybe an animal, maybe he got tangled in something, who knows. 3 of us swam out to retrieve him and bring him to shore, then tried to resuscitate him, but it was all in vain. We couldn't do anything. We cried over his lifeless body. He was a good person and didn't deserve to end like that. As the tragedy unfolded, time passed quickly and night fell. It was completely dark, and there was no way we could cross the woods with our friend's body back to the car. Not only would it have been difficult, but we also might have encountered some wild animal. So we had no choice but to spend the night by the lake. The atmosphere was desolate. There were arguments among us, with people blaming each other. Why didn't someone accompany him? Why didn't the person closest hear him scream? Or my friend who regretted not joining him because she didn't want to get wet. We said so many things due to the stress of the situation, but deep down, we all knew it was just a terrible accident, and no one was to blame. Before we went to sleep, there was complete silence. None of us knew what to say about what had happened. One of my friends, Lucia, was especially affected, as they had just started to get to know each other, and a relationship was probably about to begin. She couldn't stop crying. In the end, we didn't do much but lie down and try to sleep, and as soon as the first light of dawn appeared, we planned to lift our friend's body and take it directly to the car to leave. Then, in the middle of the night while the others slept, I looked at everyone resting, but I noticed that Lucia wasn't in her tent. I was worried about her well-being because she was truly devastated, and I feared she might do something to herself. So I got up and walked a few meters when suddenly I heard noises in the distance, near the lake. I ran over, and the closer I got, the more I noticed that the noise sounded like someone splashing. I hurried faster to find Lucia. She was in danger, and for some reason I believed she had gone into the lake and was probably drowning. When I arrived, I saw a silhouette near the shore. I could clearly see that something was wrong. Without hesitation, I dove in to rescue her, determined not to lose another friend. I could hear her cries, but in the last few meters before reaching her, her figure vanished. I started looking around, thinking she might have moved or gone underwater, but I didn't see anything again. I felt completely bewildered by what I had just seen, but I decided to return to the shore. Suddenly, I heard screams coming from the trees. It was Lucia. She was screaming as she approached, furious, asking me what I was doing swimming at that hour and what I thought I was trying to prove, questioning if I thought what had just happened was some kind of joke. I was speechless when I saw her because I was sure she had been drowning. I told her I had gone into the water to help her because I thought I saw her drowning, but she said she had never gone near the lake. She explained that she had gotten up to use the bathroom and took some time alone to process the loss of our friend, and she had no idea what I was talking about. As we walked back toward the trees, that's when we heard it. The cries and moans of a man coming from the depths of the lake. It was the voice of our deceased friend, and that's when we understood what was happening. We ran back to the others to tell them what had happened. They looked at us with doubt, but seeing how shaken we were, they eventually believed us, and we all decided to leave. Fortunately, not long after, daylight began to break, and we immediately started our journey back, leaving behind some of our belongings to get out faster. Besides, we had to carry our friend. We gave him a proper farewell with all his family and loved ones. Weeks later, the same group that had gone on that tragic trip decided to return to the lake to place a cross and say a few words to our friend, to tell him that everything was okay, that we would take care of his family, and that he could rest in peace. Good evening, community. My name is Mario, and I want to tell you a truly terrifying story, an experience my wife and I had in a forest in the United States. Honestly, I never imagined something like that could happen, especially not on a day we had enjoyed so much. I can't say for sure what triggered it all or what exactly happened, but I can tell you that we made it out alive. Not unharmed or unscathed, but alive. And that's what matters. My wife Rebecca and I had chosen to travel to the United States for our anniversary. It was her idea to explore one of the national forests in the country. I don't want to say which one, as I don't want to ruin the place's reputation because despite everything, it's a good place to visit. Sometimes I feel like we made some bad decisions that led to what happened, and soon you'll understand why I say that. We were with a group of people who, like us, were afraid of getting lost. The thing is, she kept insisting that we venture a little deeper into the forest, but I refused. It was clear that with the map app, we could easily find our way back without any trouble, but I still didn't want to take the risk. She always had a way of convincing me to go along with her crazy ideas, and this time was no different. I told her we should stay with the group a little longer to at least get a sense of the trail or path so we'd have a better chance of not getting lost. She agreed to that, but I could tell she was getting impatient. One of the tourists acted as a guide, telling us stories about the trees, wooden bridges, and the whole area, but honestly, it was really boring. We weren't too interested in the history. We just wanted to wander through nature and explore places unfamiliar to us. So I ended up telling my wife that I agreed with her idea, and we finally separated from the group. That rush of adrenaline was exciting. We couldn't even hear the voices of the group anymore. We were completely on our own, but we still knew where we were. We kept walking when suddenly, we heard the crunching of leaves very close by. We turned around and saw it was a woman wearing a green shirt, like some sort of uniform. She said she was a forest guide, part of the staff responsible for ensuring that people who wandered off on their own didn't get lost. Monica and I laughed because we thought it was just an animal, but we greeted her kindly. When she offered to show us more of the forest, we agreed. With her, we didn't get bored. She really knew how to keep us entertained with interesting stories about the forest, though one in particular made me feel uneasy. It didn't seem made up, as she swore it happened right there in that same forest. The story was about a serial killer who hid bodies in a remote area off the main trails deep in the woods. Over the years, the site was discovered, filled with bones and trash he left behind. Even worse, the killer had practiced cannibalism, eating his victims' bodies. We couldn't be sure if what she was saying was true or not, but it kept us thoroughly entertained. Eventually, we came upon a small, run-down cabin. It wasn't the first time we had seen something like that in the many forests of the United States. It looked normal from the outside. But after hearing the guide's story, all I could think about was whether this might be the place where the murders she mentioned took place. I didn't feel safe approaching it, and I noticed Monica felt the same. She wrapped her arms around mine and squeezed tightly. We both wanted to go back, and we told the guide as much. Besides, we had plans for the night and couldn't return too late. That's when she said there was nothing to worry about. Those events had happened decades ago, and it was interesting to see the place. After thinking about it for a bit and once again giving in to the spirit of adventure, we decided to go inside. From the moment we took our first step inside, the atmosphere felt incredibly heavy. It was nothing like what we had felt while walking through the forest. The sounds of nature seemed to vanish, and a sense of discomfort washed over us. The guide reassured us that there was nothing to be afraid of and insisted on showing us every corner of the cabin. But then, we heard horrible screams coming from outside. It sounded like many people crying out and screaming in pain. Without knowing what was happening, Monica and I decided to leave, but the guide almost commanded us to stay, saying we didn't know what was making those sounds outside. But my wife had a gut feeling, like a sixth sense, and she knew something wasn't right. Before the guide could come closer, supposedly to protect us, Monica whispered under her breath for me to trust her, and we bolted out of there. I didn't hesitate for a second, and we ran to the door, me right behind my wife as the guide shouted at us not to leave and to wait for her. But I had complete trust in my wife and ignored her entirely. When we got outside, we saw absolutely nothing, not a single person, and the screams suddenly stopped. All we could hear again was the sound of nature. We looked at each other, completely baffled by the situation, not knowing what was going on. We saw that the guide had stayed inside the cabin, not following us. But suddenly, those same sounds started coming from inside, and loud banging on the door, like something or someone was furiously pounding on it. I don't remember a time when my heart raced as fast as it did then. We ran, but my wife was slow. I was yelling at her to hurry up and run faster. I was really desperate. I felt like our lives were in danger. Unfortunately, in her panic, Monica tripped over a rock and twisted her ankle. We kept running, hoping we were following the trail through the trees that would lead us back to the other tourists, and in the end, we made it. As soon as they saw us, they rushed to help, carrying my wife out of the forest and to the nearest ranger station. Later, we spoke to the ranger, and I told him everything. But he told us that no one else was working in that section of the forest except for him. He had never worked with any other guide. We gave a description, but he had no idea what we were talking about. It remains an unsolved mystery. We think that maybe it wasn't a person, but something else. Something that manifested to lure us to that cabin filled with negative energy. Or perhaps it was a follower of the criminal who committed those heinous acts long ago. Who knows what her intentions were in leading us there? That cabin is infested with something evil that we cannot defend ourselves against. And luckily, we got out before anything worse could happen. When my wife was discharged from the hospital, we immediately left for another city. I don't want to name the forest because what happened to us was due to our own actions. We should have stayed with the rest of the group. This is my message to everyone who hikes in nature. Never explore trails that aren't marked on the map. There's always a reason for that. Good night, everyone. This story took place decades ago in the Tongass Forest back in 1984, when I was a 14-year-old girl enjoying a trip with my family. I'm not afraid to tell it because I feel condemned either way. I hope this at least serves to warn others, and that as soon as they see any abnormal structure in the middle of any forest, they run. I'm keeping the name of the place to myself because it would stir up controversy and more, but I can confidently say that this was the worst experience of my entire life, one that, in one way or another, brought it to an end. My father had been insisting for days that he wanted to go to a forest where he had gone with his family when he was little. My mother was the only one opposed to the idea. She didn't like places like that at all, and she had good reason. As a child, she got lost in one of those forests, and it took more than 24 hours to find her. I can't imagine being in a situation like that, especially at just 10 years old. On the other hand, she realized she wasn't that young anymore, and I was older, so she felt safe enough to say yes. My father made plans to go for a full weekend. I was an only child, but I didn't think about inviting any of my friends. To be honest, I just wanted to go with my parents. I loved spending time with them. They were the best moments a person could have. Being there in the forest, the atmosphere felt wonderful. It was my first time in one so immense. We had already covered a good distance as my father told me stories about when he used to camp there, about the animals he encountered and things like that. My mother remained silent, as she was a woman of few words, but she loved listening to him speak with such enthusiasm. I enjoyed listening to him too, more than he could have ever imagined. It was then that my mother got a rather strong headache and my father had no choice but to return to the campsite so she could rest. I told them I'd stay out a bit longer and catch up with them later. They didn't protest, they just told me not to wander too far because I could get lost. I had my headphones on and followed an easy-to-remember path so I could retrace my steps. That was until I saw something black and dark in the distance, very striking among the trees. I thought it was a wall of some abandoned house, but when I got closer, I was shocked to see that it was a structure made of branches and stones, forming a sort of altar, all painted black. It was the first time I'd ever seen something like that, and I must confess it filled me with curiosity. I walked through the bushes and circled around it to see it from the front, but when I reached the open space in front of the altar, I saw a group of people kneeling on the ground, looking down, as if they were praying in complete silence. No one moved or reacted to my presence. They looked like statues, completely still, which gave me the chills. I decided at that point that I wanted to leave, but as soon as I managed to take a few steps away, all those people stood up and began shouting at the same time, "Intruder!" Every hair on my body stood on end. I didn't understand what was happening, but I gathered my courage and tried to run to escape. However, those people were faster than me and surrounded me, forming a circle while continuing to shout. Suddenly, a man dressed in a black robe covered in strange symbols emerged from the trees. It seemed like he had been following me through the forest ever since I separated from my parents and reached that altar. He held a book in his hands, and he made the others force me to kneel and stare directly into his eyes. His face was completely expressionless, utterly neutral. He told me that my soul no longer belonged to me, and that my curiosity in invading sacred ground for them in the forest carried a high price that had to be paid immediately. A woman handed me a piece of paper, and the others threatened me, saying that if I didn't read it exactly as it was written, they would kill me on the spot. I had no choice. I had to do everything they demanded, so I read what was written on the piece of paper. At first, it was just normal prayers, but then strange words followed. The pronunciation was difficult, but as I continued, I felt an immense heat inside my body, consuming me from within. When I finished, the man in the robe grabbed my hand and made a cut with a knife. He collected the blood into the book he was holding, then screamed, praising a dark entity. The man in the robe told me that from that moment on, I had made a pact to serve his master for eternity after I died. At that instant, everyone stood up and walked toward the trees, disappearing deeper into the forest, vanishing into the mist. I never saw them again. I returned to my parents, but out of fear I didn't tell them anything. I insisted that we stop walking in the forest because I felt sick, which they eventually accepted. There was no way I would ever go back to that place. Many years later, as an adult, I decided to return to that place with my husband to face my fears and maybe do something against those evil people. But the altar was no longer there. I don't know if they left that place to torment some other part of the country or if they're still hiding somewhere in that forest. Since then, I've spent my nights crying, thinking about how absurdly my soul was condemned without even committing a crime or doing anything wrong. It's such an injustice, but I have faith that God will save me when I die. He will take care of my soul and won't allow me to live in literal hell for all eternity.